Let's go.
Hi guys, we are talking kipper decks today. I am going to go through the perhaps most used kipper decks out there and explain the best way to use the non-traditional or the the ones that don't exactly match the original kipper deck, how to use them in a Bavarian kipper reading method read, which obviously I teach and is in my book. So before I start, I'll explain the decks. We have the 1890s deck here, which is the first deck, and the gentleman facing in this direction. We then have the 1920s deck with a gentleman facing in that direction. This is the same as the red back and the green backs that you will be most used to seeing. And then we have the Mystical Kipper Deck, the Fin de Siecle deck, and mine at the end. There are other decks out there. If you want me to review and go through the directions in those, I'm happy to do so. But for now, we'll stick with these ones that most appear in my groups. As we see, the gentleman faces that way. He faces to the right in the original, and then the later deck, the 1920 deck, where the images were transposed, we see him looking in the opposite direction. In the Mystical Kipper Deck, he's looking the original direction. And Fin de Siecle, it looks like he's facing the same way as the 1920s deck. And mine obviously matches here. Well, I'm not going to jump on to the way the people look so much. It's a directional read that we're wanting, and that means the other directional cards. You always obviously have to make sure that you know which way your two people will look at each other in AGT. It's quite nice, the ladies are looking at each other here. And in this deck, you will have to use, although it's her back and she looks like she's walking away from the gentleman, you will have to use the direction so that they can face each other. Otherwise, you won't have an auspicious read. In the Fin de Siecle, you can see they can look eye to eye as long as you use these directions. So they can look on one another. I won't say much about my deck because it is exactly the same directional read as the 1890 deck. Now we're going to State of Marriage. As we know, State of Marriage is a connector card, and we need two people to make a connector card. We obviously have that. See how they're transposed? It's quite cute to see actually the two decks next to each other, 1890 and 1920, to see how different they are. The Mystical Kipper does have two people, so we can easily use that as a connector card, as does Fin de Siecle. Convene, number 4, togetherness card, our connector card again. Mystical Kipper, you have the two people on there, as does the Fin de Siecle, so you can use them as intended as the connector cards. Good gent. Again, in your Mystical Kipper and your Fin de Siecle, you will have to make sure that your gute Herr, your good gentleman, actually looks onto your good lady. So make sure you note, and the good lady needs to look onto main character 1, and good gent needs to be able to see eye to eye with main character 2. Let's have a look at those as we pull them out. They're looking at one another. Then this deck, she's looking to the right in the Mystical Kipper. There's my right, of course. And if we take it back to the main character, they can actually look eye to eye. So the male and the female can actually look eye to eye. Let's have a look at Fin de Siecle. We have our, let's have a look which way our main character is going. The men are looking onto the women. Now in this deck you see she's actually not seeing eye to eye with him. We will have to, when we're doing a GT, we will have to use her as looking the same way as our Hauptperson 2, our main character 2. So you need to think of your good lady looking in this direction if you want to have an auspicious read between your males and females in the deck. Sorry, I've put those back incorrectly. And mine obviously are the same with the 1890s, looking at one another. Letter, stop card, stop card. It's got people on it, you need to use it as a stop card. If you want to use the Bavarian Kipper reading method, stop card, stop card. Now we're moving on to our dishonest person. Dishonesty is behind her back. What she is hiding is behind the door, and it has an effect on the card ahead of her. Let's have a look at our Mystical Kipper. You will have to use behind his back as the hidden, and in front of him as the what it's affecting. Again, in the Fin de Siecle deck, don't take it as a connector card. There are two people on this card. Just take it as a cause and effect card with the special cause and effect card with the hidden behind her back. It is possible, if you don't want to use the visible cues of your deck, it is possible to use the original Kipper directions and mark them onto your deck of choice. So if you wanted to use the 1890s deck as an example, you could mark one side as the cause and the other side as the effect. Or you choose to use the visible cues in that deck. A change, we have the change, a movement, moving this way, the transpose version. And in the Mystical Kipper, we don't see much of a movement, but you have to either mark on the cards, like I say, from the deck of your choice, the 1890s or the 1920s, and then use the visual cues for that deck. We could suggest, for example, that the balloon is moving in the same direction as the 1920s deck. Let's have a look at Fin de Siecle. This is a stationary card, but we do need a change, so we do need a movement to occur in this card. So we could either again use the visual cues from the early decks and mark them on there, or you could suggest that this card isn't stationary and that it's moving in this direction. So you do get a movement from one side to the other side of the card. So we have this card being changed and the card to the other side bearing the result of that change. Okay, so let's move on to Journey. As we know, Journey card, I'll move it from both of the originals. We have the 1890s deck. We have two cards at the bottom being the start of the movement, moving up to the end of the movement. So we have a movement running up the cards as we do with the 1920s deck, albeit in the opposite direction. Let's have a look how we deal with that here. We can't see from the Mystical Kipper deck how we get that movement. I would suggest that you mark on that deck the movement either from, if you're choosing the 1890s or the 1920s, but choose one and mark the movement on. So you can actually, in a GT, take from below the cards to above the cards, albeit diagonally, of course. The ship on this, perhaps you could suggest so you can memorize it, that the man needs to get onto the ship and sail away. So you can visualize a movement in that card. Let's have a look at Fin de Siecle. Again, in the imagery itself, it doesn't have the diagonal read that we expect in the Bavarian Kipper reading method. So we either mark on that card the movement from either, again, the 1890s or the 1920s deck. So I would also always suggest using the visual cues in the deck to remind yourself of what they are. If you mark the cards, that's super, but also a visual help. Well, it does for me. Visuals always help. So we need to create with this card, if you're using the Bavarian Kipper reading method, we need to create with this card a movement from below and up, as shown in my deck. So now let's move on to win lots. We have lovely, easy stop cards. Do have people on that, but it is a stop card. Stop card, stop card, rich girl. Rich girl follows the same rules as good lady and main character 2. They have to be looking in the same way. If for any reason your deck isn't looking in the same way, I would suggest you mark on there so that you can get an auspicious read between the two characters. If you don't have a way of visualizing in a GT that auspicious or inauspicious placement, then I would suggest marking it on the cards. The same applies for Rich Gent. He has to be looking in the same direction as main character 1. If you find in your deck that he doesn't look exactly in the same direction, then I would mark it on to know if I'm getting an auspicious or inauspicious read. As you see in the Mystical Kipper, they are looking the same way. Let's check out Fin de Siecle. You can suggest that they are both facing a similar direction. Okay. 1890s Sad News is a cause and effect card. Behind her back is the cause and in front of her is affected. I would suggest on this again choosing, if it's not clear in your deck, choosing a clear direction so you're clear where their back is facing. Good outcome. Stop card has people in here, 2 people. It's not a connector card. Mark it as a stop. This is a stop card. Stop card. His thoughts. His thoughts in the original we have, he is a stop card, but the Cupid in the corner can suggest where the thoughts are or where he is in his mind or her mind. So let's have a look how we deal with that here. We have no Cupid in the corner, but you can choose a corner, perhaps using the hat here as a visual cue, or just choosing a corner to be the corner. The Fin de Siecle, we can use perhaps the image of the lady's face as the cue to where he is thinking. And my deck obviously has the Cupid as in the original deck. So this is a tricky one in some decks. Receive a gift. I won't turn that over just yet. Receive a gift moves from above to below. The gift is presented. It is coming from the card above and it is presented to the card below. So there is a movement in your GT from the card above to the card below. Different, obviously transposed in the 1920s deck here that I'm showing you, but still from above to below. Let's have a look how we deal with that with the Mystical Kipper. The Mystical Kipper looks visually more like a stop card. You will have to imagine the gift showering down from the tree above perhaps and presenting below the tree, just to give yourself that visual kick that it is a movement card from above to below. And as the same with the Fin de Siecle, it looks like a stop card. There's not much movement in there, but you can suggest that it's been presented from the person who these alarms belong to above to the card below. And then we move on to child. Child. It's a messy child in that one. Okay. As you will see, the child has a direction. It's like a main character 1, main character 2. The people cards in our deck have a direction in which they are moving. So we can see an auspicious or an inauspicious read. The Mystical Kipper here, you can actually see a direction. The child is facing in a certain direction. The Fin de Siecle looks more like a facially looking forward. However, you should choose a direction, otherwise you won't get your auspicious or inauspicious read for the child. And mine obviously the same as the 1890s. And then we're on to our majorly directional card, the Fatality card. Majorly directional. What I would suggest for the Fatality card is that you look very closely at the imagery on the two decks that aren't immediately exact directionally to the original decks. I would look at the imagery really carefully and mark on the original cards information, because it really is a whole read from the Fatality card, and you need to know which way your Fatality card is placed, where the cause is, where the effect is, what's been ended, what's been transformed. That information is all on the original decks. The Mystical Kipper and the Todesfall, the Fatality in the Fin de Siecle, you will need to mark on, but it's easily done. Next card, House, is a stop card. Stop, stop, more stop, perfect stops. Living room, stop, 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 perfect stops. And then we move on to our military person. Interesting, he was the only card in the 1890s deck that wasn't transposed. Interesting fact. So let's have a look at military person here. He's on a horse in the Mystical Kipper. You just obviously need to make sure you know he's facing. He is a stop card, but he can also be a person in the life of your querent. Military person there, looking very royal. Okay, court card is a stop card, and we should treat it as such. You have a person in the Fin de Siecle. Don't take the way he's looking, just make sure you imagine him looking straight forward. It is a stop card. We don't take any directional cues from it. Theft is very important, as we know. What is stolen is sat behind the backs of our thief. What is in front is what that theft affects. The Mystical Kipper is a little more difficult to see on those lines. I would suggest choosing an 1890s or a 1920s, that time deck, and marking on until you are clear on which way this theft is facing. Mark them on your deck. And here in the Fin de Siecle, we have 3 people on there. It's not a connector card, so don't treat it as one. We have him We have actually on this card, the child is the one that's thieving. And he's thieving from the guy in front. I would suggest choosing one of these decks and choosing a side that is the theft and a side that is affected, and mark it on your deck if you are unsure of the imagery. High Honours is a stop card. We want to see nothing but stop on there. On Mystical Kipper, we have 2 people. You can get that confused with your connector card. It isn't. It is a stop card. Imagine just one person on there, perhaps, or it just being the stop of the sword. Maybe that visually will help you remember. We do have in the Fin de Siecle, we have a lot of people on there. Again, you have to ignore it's not convene or togetherness or anything like that. It's not the connecting cards. It is a pure stop card. So imagine perhaps the guns being the stop in that card. And then Great Fortune. Lovely shiny card, stop card. All the cards are successfully a stop there. Our improvement cards, number 27. And I will stop here. We have our Unhub for Money, Unverhofftes Geld. That is our card for sudden improvements. And in this, it looks more like we have a movement or a work card. It is actually a stop card, so choose a stop and put it on your card until you can remember that that is a stop card. Fin de Siecle, a nice stop card. Imagine the money in the middle not going anywhere. There's no connections on it. Okay, I'm getting a bit messy on my decks here. Now we have Expectation. She is a cause and effect. She has a cause behind her back. She affects the card in front. Bit tricky when we come to the Mystical Kipper. Again, you will have to choose a side that is the cause of the card and a side that is affected. Maybe you choose the direction in which the dog is looking. So behind the dog's back is the cause and in front is the effect. Erwartung, she's looking the same direction as Erwartung in the 1920s deck. And then we have Prison, our lovely stop card. Big building stop card. Stop, brilliant. Stop and stop. The imagery on all of them is that of stopping and not much action being taken. Our court official, we have a lovely, one of my favorite cards, as you know, connector card. So we need 2 people on there to connect the 2 cards either side. Our Mystical Kipper has more than 2 people. Just imagine the 2 being connected. It looks a bit more like a stop card, but it is a connection. Fin de Siecle, you have the 2 people here, you have the 2 connectors. Now, I love this bit on the back of this one. See that? It's got like an extra. I love it. Short Illness is also a connector card. It connects the 2 cards either side, so we want to see 2 people on here. We only see 1 in the Mystical Kipper deck, but we do have a few cats. So maybe we use the cats as the visual reminder that this is a connector card. Short Illness in Fin de Siecle. You have 2 people, you can connect with them. The interesting thing is this one has switched the male and females. So it's male patient on this one rather than the female patient. Doesn't make any difference, it's still a connector card. And our Short Illness there. Let's now look at our Sorrow. The interesting thing with Sorrow in the original deck is that the more modern readers are using this as a directional read. When I first came to Kipper, I learned from more modern readers, and they always used the stress card as sorrow card as a movement and passing through him or pacing the room as an example. And then when I met the super amazing German families who pass this down through generation, it's actually a stop card to them. So we're looking for stops in the sorrow card. So the more traditional readers who actually passed it down and can actually, they are the source of these the 1890s type decks, or they can source it back to their families. They use the 32 card as a stop card, and in the Bavarian Kipper method that I teach, we use it as the original old stop. So now let's have a look how the Mystical Kipper deals with that. And it is a stop card. He's sat down, he's not moving, he is quite stopped. So the Mystical Kipper does a good job of portraying the stop nature of this card. Fin de Siecle, he's also sat down at the end of his wits, if you like. It uses a very different name in German, I'm not sure why, but the stop card nature is reflected in my deck. Then we have a cause and effect, our gloomy. So we're looking for a card behind his back and a card in front of him to explain gloominess. We don't find that in the Mystical Kipper so easily, but if you just take a look at the imagery, we can see the cliffside. So we can say that the cause comes from behind the cliff, so at this side, and the effect is at the other side. Let's see how Fin de Siecle, he has a back and a front, so it's very clear to see a cause and effect there. And then we have our work card. Work is a stop. It does mean great effort, but it is a stop card in our decks. The Mystical Kipper, he's working in the fields there, as in the original. The Fin de Siecle, she sat at a sewing machine and clearly shows a stop. Long way. This is the one where we will see if any decks trip themselves up, or if we need to write on any directional cues. The long way, I will show you in this one because the imagery is clearer than you can't really see. It's got so old, my lovely 1890s. We see the road traveling from below the card across to the card to the side. So a long way moves from the card below across to the side and shows a period of 2 years. Some readers believe, more traditional readers do believe, that this is the long time card, the card that will take a long time to come. And what will take a long time is the journey from the card below to the card to the side. See how Mystical Kipper deals with that. We do see a windy road on the Mystical Kipper, and we'll have to use the rock at this side as the out card. We'll travel from below and go out of the card. Let me have a look at although the road, he's traveling this way. If you can see, there's a man on that card. Use your visual cues. Check back to the deck and make sure you have a visual cue from below the card to the side of the card, depending on whether you choose the earliest deck or the transposed deck. Let's have a look at how Fin de Siecle deals with that. We have a more, it's more vertical. However, you would use one of the cues on here to take it to the side so that you do have your 2-year card. obviously my deck is bottom to side as this deck here. And then Hold Great Water is our stop card. Show us stops. Please show me more stops. It's definitely a stop here. And on the Fin de Siecle, we have a ship. We have to ignore the movement of the ship and treat it as a stop card. And there you have it. Again, if you have any of these other decks, the red backs, let's turn them all over so you can see. Blue backs, red backs, green backs, plain backs, whichever original you have, these three are read in the same directional cues. They are transposed to the original version. My version matches this version. And the Fin de Siecle and the Mystical Kipper follow their own version, and there is nothing wrong with that. You just need to know that visual cues will be needed to remind you until you've got your movements under control. So guys, let me know in the comments which deck you prefer, which deck you enjoy working with. I will also list where you can get these decks. The often asked question is why I choose not to use the two newer decks. It's not that I choose not to use them, it's just that I learned with the transposed version and I'm quite happy with that. I love the cards. I now have my deck as well, and obviously you've got to love your own deck. So it's not a case of not liking these decks or that they are unreadable, which they are obviously not. It is just that I like the original and I'm happy with it. Again, let me know what you like. Let me know which deck is your deck. Let me know how you work with that deck. And also if you would like any videos doing while I'm here. You comment, subscribe, like, share, and let's do more of these. Bye.